Scouting's been very important to us, and we love it, and we love Philmont, and we're grateful to be here. But today we want to tell you we're not only Scouters, but we're people that love the Lord and love the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And we spent a fair amount of our time the last 5 years on church missions. We went to Greece as an office couple for 1.5 years. About a year after that, we were called to serve at the Mormon Battalion site, historic site in the beautiful San Diego, California. This is our visitor center. Just by show of hands, how many have actually been there? Oh, good, a lot of you. Wonderful. That'll help. It's interesting that we started to find out that we get 110,000 visitors a year there who come. About a third of the visitors are not members of our faith. And so it's a wonderful opportunity to share with them this incredible story of the Mormon Battalion of service, sacrifice, and faith. And that's what we hope to share with you today. I don't take this assignment lightly. We've given it a fair amount of work and prayer and thought, and want you to know that we believe really totally in this great story and what it means.
So interesting. There was a thrill to serve at the Mormon Battalion. We got to serve for 3 years, and I mean, what an opportunity in our life. But we did look a little bit different than everybody else while we were there. And we had one sister that was sent to the emergency room, and she was in costume, and the nurse said, do you always wear this?
Dress like this?
So we were as you know, it's in downtown San Diego, Old Town. And it's lots of Mexican food restaurants. In fact, we determined that we could walk to 23 restaurants, 21 of them Mexican food, and that's our favorite. And so this is what happened to us. I have a pound for every restaurant. Darn it. So anyway, so you raised your hand that how many have been there? And how many had heard, you've heard about the Mormon Battalion then? Yep. How many of you have relatives that were in the Mormon Battalion? Okay, good. A few, that's awesome. We'd love to know how many. And you know, it was interesting to us when we received this calling from Elder Renlund that we knew about the Mormon Battalion, we knew they were important, we knew they suffered, they worked hard, we knew we had relatives, but we didn't know very much. And so maybe we're a little bit all that way. So we'd like to share a little bit about that.
Okay. My direct line relative is Edward Bunker. And so I love Edward Bunker. It's a great little story. He married Emily Abbott, and they got married in February, and about a month later they left. And so they left Nauvoo and headed across the plains, and a few months later he left his little bride and went to the Mormon Battalion March. And that story is not unusual. Okay?
So I'm related to Samuel Hollister Rogers. He was only 27 years old, and he was a private in Company B. And he kept great journals. So in fact, we find a lot of history books have quoted him. I always say that our lesson today talked about keeping journals. I say there's a lot of heroes out there, but we only know those who kept journals, that they became heroes to us. So we also have a common relative, both of our great-great-grandfathers, different wives. George Deliverance Wilson, he was 38 years old, and he was in the 6th Detachment. So we're going to taltalk a lot about 6th Detachment a little bit later.
Which means we're third cousins, okay?
Now, I'll throw this in. He doesn't like to say that because our kids are idiots.
Yeah, I know.
Take that.
All right.
Okay.
Get serious, get serious.
So President Brigham Young said, the Mormon Battalion will be held in honorable remembrance to the latest generation. And I will prophesy that the children of those who have been in the armies in defense of their country will grow up and bless their fathers for what they did and did at that time.
Okay, let's go through a little timetable so we can at least establish in your mind and heart what is the timetable that we're talking about. 1839, the Saints arrived in Nauvoo. They'd been expelled, run out of Missouri, Kirtland, New York, wherever. But now they're arriving in this land called Commerce, or that they named the city beautiful, or Nauvoo. June 27th, 1844, just not that long ago, Joseph and Hiram were martyred. And so we know that is a very important date in the history of the church, okay? Then February 1846, they began the Exodus. And you want to say, well, why did they leave in the middle of February, Illinois? Well, they had to. Okay, they were under great persecution, and they really had no other option. They had to leave. Okay, the mobs, quite frankly, were running them out of town. So that's when they left. Cold, bitter cold, the river froze over. I mean, miraculous things happened so that they could exit, but that's when they did it. All right. Also, at that same time, the Mexican-American War was happening, and so that was a part of our U.S. history that was going on, as well as, go ahead, next slide, Jesse C. Little petitioned James Polk. President Polk had run on the campaign of Manifest Destiny, which meant what? Ocean to ocean. We're going to own all this land. This is going to be the United States. You know, one ocean to the other ocean. So that was the platform. But Jesse C. Little, Brigham Young asked him to go to the president and say, help us out. The government's turned their backs all the time on us, but help us make some way stations so we can go west. Well, they didn't get that, but what they got was the President of the United States saying, no, not way stations, but we would let you recruit 500 of your best men, older sons, best men, husbands, and let them be gone for a year and a half or 2 years in the Army. Tough assignment, okay? All right, so that's what they did. So they started recruiting in June 26th, and by the time we got to the middle of July, they were on their way. So they left Nauvoo, Illinois. They're headed across the little plains of southern Iowa, and they head over to Council Bluffs, known also as Canesville. Then they moved across the river, and then they became a part of what now is known as Winter Quarters, Nebraska, at Council Bluffs, okay, that area. And so that was really important. They're now on Indian territory, and so they're actually out of the United States, they're in Indian territory. The enlistment, so you'd have a field, is 500 men, 100 men in each of the companies. 38 women came because why? Some of those women said, if my husband's going to go, I'm going to go. You know, we're a newly married couple and we're going to go. Or whatever. But a number of the women also went, 38 women, 57 children, and about 30 others. Meaning teamsters or military officers, that kind of thing. So about 580 moved across. All right, the march started in July of 1846. Okay. All right, at the same time, you might want to know some of the feelings. They weren't really very excited about the enlistment when James Allen came and said, we would like to invite you to join the U.S. Army and be gone for this period of time and leave your little wives and families behind. Well, if you can imagine this, Daniel Rawson said, I felt indignant toward the government that had suffered me to be raided and driven from my home. I would not enlist. And then he went on and said, you know, as Brigham Young came now and made the invite to say, we need your help, then he felt that the source came from higher above. Okay? All right, at the same time, Mr. Judd here said, this is quite a hard pill to swallow, to leave wives and children on the wild prairie, destitute and almost helpless, and quite frankly, without a way to survive. If you can just imagine. If you're the wife and you got 5 little ones and your husband's going to take off, what are you going to do for the next year and a half to provide? Very difficult. But the word came from the right source meaning Brigham Young, and from above. And it brought a spirit of conviction, so they signed up. There were some promises, though, that Brigham Young gave, particularly at the last time. So we'll go to the bullet items. This was his kind of last charge. He said, your lives will be spared. The expedition will result in great good. The names will be handed down in honorable remembrance, and they would have no fighting to do. Now that's quite the promises to be made during a war, okay? Well, I think the wives and even the members of the battalion really hung on to some of these promises.
So they were recruited here at Council Bluffs, and then they took the 120 miles down here to Fort Leavenworth. That was a real important place. That's where they received their marching orders. They mustered together. They received the equipment that they would have. So that was an important part. So I love how what Allred said. He said, we were unable to secure suitable clothes and send back to our families, for we have all left them in tents and wagons with little for them to subsist on.
But when you say suitable clothes, meaning the military garb, okay? The military dress.
So when they got to Fort Leavenworth, there wasn't enough uniforms. So they gave them a uniform allowance of $42, which would be over $1,400 today. So you can imagine how substantial that is for each soldier to receive that kind of money. And then they sent that back to their families. And their families were able to buy food, clothing, and even wagons that took them back west. So right at the beginning, so it was really truly a blessing that they didn't wear the uniform. Now, every time you see the Mormon Battalion, you will see this. You'll see a white strap coming this way, a white strap coming this way, and a white belt. And that's what they had to keep clean. And that's what the laundresses had to keep clean, as you can imagine how hard that would be. But so when you see a Mormon Battalion person, that's what you're going to see as their uniform. Okay, so here's the trail of the Mormon Battalion. So they started, of course, in Omaha, Council Bluffs, but then they mustered here, and then they came on down through these states.
So let me just remind you, this is July, heading through the Southwest Desert, so just kind of think through those thoughts.
All right, so I love these quotes from Levi Hancock. He was the 70, or the spiritual leader of the Mormon Battalion, and he would always remind them to do good things. Here's his journal. They left on July what, Brad?
July 26th, right, 25th, 22nd, right in there.
So he said, we crossed over the Tokyo Creek, traveled 20 miles. They're hiking, okay? Not a word of complaint from any man. July 26th, the next day, my feet became sore. My pain was severe. The sore had been of long duration. Opened it with my knife. My health was poor. Marched 20 miles. Camped by a good spring. I love that. That positive feeling. But we had a good spring.
Don't you love it, though? They wake up and what do they get to do? 20 more miles. 20 more miles.
So I just wanted to share with you a good scouter, Kevin Henson and his wife Denny. In 2008 and 2009, they marched the Mormon Battalion Trail. They did it all on their own. In fact, we used many of their determining where the Mormon Battalion came through here from they went, checked journals, and that's how they marched. But interesting, I wanted to tell you his scouting connection. He was an 11-year-old Boy Scout leader, and it was a living history event in Bay City, Michigan. And that began his quest with the Mormon Battalion. So it's really cool how that jumped off. So he's a great scouter.
Not only did they do the march, but they tried to do it exactly how the battalion would have done it day by day. So, the battalion was on foot. The officers had horses, but the battalion members were all on foot.
They did have several wagons, but they didn't get to ride
The wagons all gave out before they got there.
It was for their equipment.
Yeah.
Right. So here's the, Brad, you want to?
Oh, I think this is mine. So this is the Cimarron Cut-Off, and again, we're in Philmont, and so this is kind of important, but the Cimarron Cut-Off starts here in Kansas, and this was very important because they were trying to get to Santa Fe by October the 10th or 9th. It was kind of a military command that they get to a certain location by a certain time, and they said, if you don't get there, we're going to dismiss all of you, and you'll be dismissed without pay. And so it's really important. So at this point, we had some that took the Cimarron Cut-Off going towards Santa Fe, and then you had another group that they excused from the battalion, a lot of women and children, and sent them to Pueblo, Colorado. And we'll cover more of that as we go forward, okay? But just so you have a sense for that.
I just want to show you, this is the Santa Fe Trail, and they could have gone this way or this way. This is the shorter, but this is the harder one.
Okay? All right. So when they left, they didn't have the provisions they needed, and so this march to Santa Fe along this Cimarron Cut-Off was really tough. They got very thirsty. Often they would go 2 days without water, and we say here, hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. Well, they had no choice. They had no water. Finally, they'd find a pond, and they'd find that it had buffalo urine in it, or 1,000 bison, and yet they're so thirsty, they just had to drink. So that's what they did. Now, they drink this terrible water, and what happens? They all get sick. And so it's one compound after the other, and so it's really some issues. All right? And finally, they came to a stagnant pond, but had to drive the buffalo out of it. The water was so thick with buffalo urine, bugs and rainwater, etc. They tried to drink it through their teeth, and it just didn't work. They just ended up all getting sick. But water and adequate food was a really big issue. And you'll notice that was in September, and so it's still pretty warm around here. Okay? All right, a couple of other quotes James Brown said. Their shoes became so dry and hard that walking was very painful. They didn't have the hiking boots or shoes that we have today. They just had these old shoes that they might have had one pair for the whole 2,000 plus miles, okay? Our feet became raw as we tramped through the sands. We became so weak it's almost impossible to keep our ankles from striking together as we walked, and our hard and dry shoe tops would cut our ankles till the blood came. So it's very challenging. This walking was a big issue, okay? For almost 200 miles, there had been little food and water for the men and the shortage of feed for the animals. So you begin to think about this. We're talking about food for now 335 people or more, and then all their animals, and how are we going to take care of them? Well, teams of men failed frequently as they traveled over sandy riverbeds that were dry, okay?
All right. So this is where we are. They made it, so they made Council Bluffs, they made it to Santa Fe finally. So that was the road, the Santa Fe Trail. But from there, they had to make their own trail, their own wagon road into San Diego. So this is what they're doing all here.
Once they left Santa Fe, right?
So I just want to we're going to take you quickly through just a few items during their trail. This is down in southern Arizona, down near south of Tucson. And this is where they had the Battle of the Bulls. And many of you, especially you that have been to the historic site, know the Battle of the Bulls. That was the only fight they had to fight was with bulls. But even though they lost lots of, let's see, I have written here, they lost 3 men severely hurt, several mules gored to death, and several dozen bulls were killed. But those bulls gave them meat, and it proved to be such a great blessing for them. Yeah.
Why did the government want to die?
Well, they were trying to secure the border and fortify the border between the U.S. and Mexico. And so the whole issue was, we want to go ocean to ocean, but we need to control the land between the U.S. and Mexico. See, at this point, all of California took in about 5 or 6 states in geographic territory. And so the march was to give a presence, and we're coming. We're coming with 500 men to fortify this territory. Good
It was
question.
Mexican occupied.
Right, right. This is 1846, 47. Okay.
So there's all along, there are just amazing monuments to the Mormon Battalion. This is the one in Tucson. Just want to make you aware of it. I just think it's a great one. They were exchanging buttons and cloth.
It's interesting, all these monuments are to help us remember what they did.
So then there was the Yuma crossing. So this is on the Colorado River. Yuma going into, the border going into Arizona to California. And before they had they were on the Gila River, following that along, the Gila River in Arizona. And so they had said, okay, let's help with our provisions. Let's put them on a raft. We'll make a raft out of our wagon boxes. And their provisions are mostly flour. And so the flour toppled into the river, and so they lost, just becomes glump, right? And so they lost a lot of the provisions, which was so very sad because now they're getting ready to go across the Imperial Desert.
A really pleasant desert.
Go back? You bet.
Because your bottom line, the bottom border is the old Arizona.
Uh-huh.
Oh, is it down here now?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, 'cause Arizona
Next.
initially
The Gadsden Purchase helped in some of that,
was taken in Baja. It was to be a deep water seaport, and the surveyor shot it wrong and ended up with that other line,
Yep.
which left Arizona with really no reason to keep there. It's a desert.
All right, so they had to go across the Imperial Desert. They did go south around it into what now would be Mexico, but it was very, very difficult, as you can imagine.
So imagine you're going to walk across this with no water for weeks.
Well, they just crossed the Sonora Desert.
Correct.
Right to
Right,
Arizona.
right.
But they had the Gila River. They were following the river then.
But now there's no river.
So Henry Boyle said, we were all weary and fatigued, hungry, nearly naked and barefoot, but our burning thirst drowned out every other suffering. So then the next big thing that they endured was called Box Canyon, and it's out there on the desert. We take our missionaries out there and let them experience that. So they came to this canyon and they couldn't get, it was too narrow, they couldn't get their wagons. So they started chipping away, taking it down the sides, and then they still couldn't, and they took the wagons apart and handed them through. He lifted through, as you can imagine. So that's out in the desert in Box Canyon, at Box Canyon out in California. So here's your San Diego, here's your Yuma's over here. Okay.
Sometimes the toughest part of the hike is the last. That's really what it was here.
Okay, so there's Box Canyon, just give you some reference here. So here's San Luis Rey Mission, it's where Trevor is from, right there. So Oceanside. And so interesting, so they were there was a mission there. They stayed in these barracks right here, and it's there, the ruins are still there today. There's a monument to the Mormon Battalion. The neat part about Oceanside was this is the first time they saw the ocean. You can only imagine the joy they felt. As they, almost like, we made it. We made it in 6 months. David Pettigrew said, "We shortly came in sight of the Pacific Ocean, which to us was a good sight, as we had performed a long and tedious march, and suffered many hardships and privations, both with weariness, hunger, thirst, and cold. Most of us were barefoot, and our clothes were very ragged." Good people. And then they made it to San Diego. And this is the Mormon Battalion Historic Site, if you're not aware of it.
So interesting, when they arrived in San Diego, there were now 335 members of the battalion that made it. The history records would say there was less than 300 people living in San Diego at the time. So you can imagine how those folks felt when these religious zealots, the Mormon Battalion, was coming into San Diego with more than what they had. So there's a lot of concern about that. Question, yeah.
But I heard that Tucson evacuated when the Mormon Battalion came, because they were afraid. But do I remember talking to you and others that we think that possibly the Mormon Battalion went right past Rayado?
Oh, we're going to get to that.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Great question, but we will get to that. Okay, so as they arrived in San Diego on January 29th, had 335 men, 5 women, 1 child. Okay, so that's what they came with. That's what actually arrived there. Melissa Corey, that's all.
So Melissa Corey, who marched with the Mormon Battalion, and her husband, new husband, she said, "I didn't mind it. I walked because I wanted to. My husband had to walk, and I went along by his side."
And this was their honeymoon.
And that's such a
Not this one.
sweet quote. I love it. So they arrived in San Diego. Another woman we have is Lydia Hunter. Lydia Hunter was also one of the 5 that arrived here, and she gave birth on April 20th, 1847, to the first white boy in California. And but 6 days later, she died, and they named the little boy Diego, and he was raised by one of the women there in San Diego. Yeah, it's really a sweet story. We don't have time for all that, but there's a monument in the Rosecrans National Cemetery there in military in San Diego.
It's beautiful.
It's where I want to be resurrected. One side's the Bay of San Diego, the other side's the Pacific Ocean. It's gorgeous.
All right, so now let's bring this connection to Mexico, New Mexico, okay? So the question was a little bit about that. So we have the Land of Enchantment. So these little circles are quite light. We'll try to make sure we highlight them. Go ahead.
Okay, so you have up here, you have Raton.
So Raton, what you know, is about 40 miles up the road, 64. We come down here to Philmont area, okay?
So there's Philmont, here's
All right, so the Philmont, and then we come down to Santa Fe. So that'll give you an overall map and give you a feel for that, okay?